Ready to go? Yeah. I need a motion to adjourn our commission meeting.
So moved.
All in favor? Okay. And then we will reconvene our special meeting. Brian, if you'll help us, please, sir.
Yes, sir. So, again, good to see the board again. Felt like I've been standing here in front of you a lot lately, and I know the public works staff feels the same way. We are finally to a point where hopefully we'll get some direction from the board. You've got some pretty hefty decisions to make. So I'm going to run through a few things, kind of, again, try to highlight those items that you'll need to think about, make decisions, give us directions on. If you have questions, we'll try to address those. But in the end, we're going to have a recommendation for you, and you're going to have to decide individually what you want to do and how you want to move forward. So I'll start from there. So earlier today, you had Stantec kind of go over some of the rate classifications, our miscellaneous fees. It talked about some of the disparities we have with how the water customers aren't necessarily generating the same revenue to cover the costs, but the sewer customers are. So it does actually end up to be a wash, but ultimately those customers aren't necessarily covering the cost of service. We also talked about a strategy, and I hope you heard what Andy recommended, is that number one, we wait approximately 2 years to do our system development fee study. We'll actually start it in about 1.5 years because we need time to actually finish it and then give it to the board for you to adopt it. But in that time frame, we also look at doing another rate analysis. And the reason why I believe Andy asked for that is we might have better data by then. Right now, this data is the best that we can have. It's estimates on a lot of occasions. And while that's not bad, and there's a way that you can use that, we might have better data. And that may be something that you actually want to use in setting those classifications and setting those changes. So we agree. We think that's probably a better thing to do. That doesn't mean that we're not going to recommend that in the end that you increase the rates, because we do have some rate changes that we think you'll need to consider. We do think it's probably reasonable for you to consider some rate classifications to add to the system. But as far as whether you raise the rates for water customers but you don't raise them as much for sewer customers, we're not going to necessarily recommend that you go into that at this point in time. We're going to say let's sort of hold that off for the time being. So let's move forward. There were some questions from the last time, and I wanted to circle back around, and staff help me get this information so to answer some of those questions you had. How does the diversion work? What does it do? Obviously, it does provide some flexibility for us. It is not considered a capacity issue. You could provide additional capacity for 6 Mile by itself, but at the plant, it's not intended to be a capacity expansion. It's really for operational flexibility. You can see our historical flows here, a little over 1 million for a year. That's not every day. That's a year total, how much we actually did. Same thing in 20, roughly what we did, average daily flows. So we did not necessarily, we started going down in the amount because the cost went up. Charlotte changed their rates. They started with a pre-treatment industrial rate. They added that plus some surcharges, and we noticed that was certainly a bigger price tag, so we reduced the amount of flow that we're actually sending in. I can go over more detail, but essentially it's really designed for us to manage peak flows, wet weather flows, those types of systems. You also asked for some project timelines. We've broken that up into wastewater capital projects as well as water capital projects. And I believe you should have a copy of this. If you don't, in paper form, we'll make sure you have it. But the gold color is for planning and the design, and then the orangish color is really for construction. Those are the estimated timelines for those different projects. If you were to do them, some of them, if you did them, some of them are things that are already planned to be done and have been in the works. So obviously, when you talk about the Crooked Creek Interceptor improvements, those are already planned and in the works. They're things that you'll need to have in place for that treatment plant to operate more efficiently. Some of the other items, the septic tank effluent gravity assessment and replacement, that's been in the works for some time. So a few of these are items that you may choose to do, but most of these are projects that have been in the pipeline all along as far as the capital needs for wastewater. We have the same for water. You have a lot of projects in here that were set aside that are moving forward over time. You'll see a number of those dealing with Yadkin as well as the short line and water main extensions. Those are all programmed to continue as long as the board sees fit to fund those items. But right now, those are shown as being all projects that we're going to do in the future. Let's get back to the base scenario that we told you about. There were some questions about the base scenario, and I think Andy talked about that in great detail, and I hope he was able to answer some of your questions. But what's included in that base detail is the $32.7 million for the Yadkin distribution system. The fact that the Yadkin bonds were all one bond issuance and not two, because we originally planned for that to be two, that did have some impact, and obviously we have to adjust for that. The Grassy Branch expansion, as well as the water and wastewater projects that are listed in the capital program, not those capacity ones that you need to give us direction on, but all those other projects, they're all included in that baseline, which we're estimating that to be 2.5. Now, I want you to understand that we can't promise you it's going to be 2.5 in 2027. We're projecting it's going to be 2.5. Every year we have to evaluate this, and we have to see, are construction prices going up far and beyond what we estimated? Are our costs what we estimated those costs to be? And then we have to adjust those, and we have to actually make sure that we're able to meet it. We think that we can meet it for the next 3 years. Well, we're obviously going to watch it. We're going to ask the board ultimately for you to adopt a 3-year rate schedule. We estimate that in the next 3 years, we'll need 2.5% rate increase. If you do nothing, if you add no capacity whatsoever, this is what we think we're going to need as far as the baseline scenario. So I want you to be aware of that, and I want you to understand that in 2026, we can't promise it'll be 2.5. It may be different at that time. Could be lower, could be higher. I just don't know. That's our guess at this point in time. Summary of options. We told you about all the different options that are there. If you went from 12 Mile, you did an expansion to 9, roughly $26 million for that. If you did it to 12, it's $72 million. Poplin, you can see those numbers there. I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are the estimated costs for each one of those items. And I stress estimated because they're not construction bids. They're based on the best available information we have, how much is a cost per mile for pipe, construction cost, anything that we have, we've used to try and develop these estimates. They're as good as we can get at this point in time, but those numbers will change. When it comes time to bid, that will not be the number. I'll be very surprised if that's the number. So what we did is we tried to put together 5 different scenarios to give you an idea of what the rate impacts would be based on those 5 scenarios. And what you see here are there are different projects that would be included in those 5 scenarios depending on which scenario you choose. And this just sort of lays those out. You know, if you take, for instance, fund 12 Mile expansion to 9 MGD, well, that's shown in 1, 2, and 3. But it's not shown in 4 and 5. And then same thing for 12 Mile. Well, that's shown, expansion to 12 MG, that's shown in 4 and 5. That's not shown in 1, 2, and 3. And so this is just giving you an idea how these projects fit into each one of the scenarios. And what I'm going to do is go over the scenarios in detail with you. So scenario number 1, this is the one that the staff has recommended. So you would fund the 12 Mile plant expansion to 9 MGD. That shows you design in 22, construction in 24, and we anticipate operation in 26. We would suggest that you fund the Lower Crooked Creek plant. Again, starting in 2022 is when you would fund it. You design it in 24, construction in 26, operational by 28. Those are assumptions. There can always be things that potentially slow that down. You also fund an east side expansion. And what I mean by that is you set aside some level of funding for an east side solution, whether that's a partnership with Monroe, whether that's doing our own thing, or it's a combination or some other solution. You fund some amount of money in order to actually have a solution in hand. And then last but not least, you adjust the CIP to match the cost of the environments that we have. What we're showing to you there is we estimate that for the next 3 years, well, actually for the next 6 years, you're going to have a 5.5% rate increase to do that. After that, the rate increase would be much lower. So that's if you were to choose this option. It's our estimate that the rate increases would be 5.5% at least for the next few years. Scenario number 2. This is if you were to, again, expand the wastewater treatment plant in 12 Mile to 9 MGD. You would authorize the purchase of land for the Lower Crooked Creek, and you'd authorize the studies associated with the potential project, but you would defer design and construction of the plant for a later date. We're showing 2026 and 2028 as far as the design and the construction. You would still fund the east side sewer expansion. You'd plug some amount of figure into that east side sewer expansion, and you'd still adjust for your CIP. By doing this, what you see is you have a 2.5% rate increase for 22 and 23, but you have a 5.75% increase for several years past that. And that's because you've deferred that Lower Crooked Creek construction costs. You've just made it necessary that we have to make up those funds at a later time, and it's stretched out longer because you've pushed it a little bit. And that's why you see those numbers higher, and you see them go out in later years in order to accomplish that. Scenario number 3. Okay, that's where you do everything but no Lower Crooked Creek at all. You do fund the 12-mile expansion from 7.5 to 9. You do nothing on Lower Crooked Creek. You fund the east side expansion, and you adjust the CIP. And we're estimating that rate impact would be 3.5% for the foreseeable future if you do nothing with the Lower Crooked Creek plant and you only fund that with the 12-mile creek expansion. Scenario 4. There was a lot of talk over options for how you could accommodate, some additional flow for Poplin and Crooked Creek without actually having to build the Lower Crooked Creek plant. What would that look like? Well, understand that if you increase the flow from Poplin as well as Crooked Creek, you're going to need to increase 12-mile plant. You can't go from 7.5 to 9 and then take all the flow from Poplin and all the flow from Crooked Creek and push it back over to that plant. You're going to consume all the capacity of that plant. So therefore, you would have to expand the 12-mile creek plant to 12 MGD, and then you would have no work done on Lower Crooked Creek. And then you would add projects where you're actually going to pump Crooked Creek as well as Poplin back over the ridge. You'd expand that so that it could handle more flow. And you would also fund the east side sewer as well as the CIP adjustments. We estimate that cost to be 11% increase for the first 3 years and then 2.5% after that. And that's because, understand, what you're having to do is expand the pump station and the flow in order to be able to accommodate all of this new that you're pushing over the ridge to the 12-mile plant. So you're expanding 12 mile more than you were anticipating, and you're expanding Poplin. That's why that increase is anticipated on that.
Brian, does that include the operational cost of that pump station and pumping all that of fluid?
It is estimated, the operational cost, yes, sir.
Okay.
Now, obviously, we'll know more about it when we get into it, but it does have an operational component estimated in
Okay.
there.
Brian, just to be clear,
Mhm.
so this item is labeled Crooked Creek Basin Pump Over to 12 Mile Creek via the Poplar Road Pump Station. So this, in the way this reads, this is taking the Crooked Creek, the flow that's coming into the current Crooked Creek plant, and then pumping it via Poplar Road back to 12 Mile.
That's correct. Yes, sir. So essentially, you're going to take that 1.9 million or whatever the flow is at Crooked Creek, and you're going to push it now to 12 Mile. And you're going to take Poplin, its flow, and you're going to continue to push it to 12 Mile. So you're adding those two flows together, which is why you have to expand 12 Mile to 12, because you're increasing the amount of flow that you're pushing into 12 Mile in order to accomplish this. What does this do? Well, what it does do is it allows you to have additional capacity in the Crooked Creek Basin. But obviously, there's a cost that comes with that. You have to find a way to give you additional capacity. And the only way to do that without building the lower Crooked Creek is to send that flow to 12 Mile. That's the only way to do that. So that's what this accomplishes. But obviously, you've got some other costs that are tied to that in order to be able to do that.
The flow is 1.9 for,
The actual plant is rated at 1.9. Right now, that's not what it's flowing, but obviously, you would want to flow. If you want to expand the area, then you're going to want to flow more than 1.9. That way, you can expand the service area and you can expand the capacity for Crooked Creek. So this would allow you to pump more than 1.9 over there. It would be more than that, but it's still costly.
So, I'm sorry, I've got one more question.
Sure.
This scenario, we would continue to operate Crooked Creek and then pump whatever the overage is, the plant, or we would just, it would be.
Crooked Creek would become a pump station.
Just a pump station?
Yeah,
Okay,
you would
that's-
pump that flow to Poplin. Basically, it would pump to Poplin and then come back down to 12 Mile.
Just wanted to clarify.
Yep.
Thank you.
Is that correct? Sort of.
You could do it,
Either way.
you could do it either way.
Okay. Well, you could do it either way.
Mr.
but-
Chairman,
yes, sir.
the West Fork of 12 Mile Creek, those have already been funded. That's already funded, those upfits of that, doing the West Fork 12 Mile Creek.
Putting that new line in, yes, sir, we have the money set aside for
And that'll
that.
take some pressure off of the east fork of
Yes,
that,
it will take some of the pressure off the east,
and
yes, sir.
hopefully slow some of the I that we have infiltration.
I think it will help, yes, sir.
Yeah, so that could help gain some capacity.
It doesn't gain you capacity. What
Yeah.
it does is it actually allows you to take the pressure off of east side.
Yeah, releases some, relieve some of the inflow though, because you don't have that vacuum drawing in, is what you talked to us about this before.
Yes, sir, you've got a significant amount of I in that area. So we anticipate it could help with that. Yes, sir. All right, last one is the scenario for the Crooked Creek pump over by itself. That is, you continue to operate Poplin the way it's operating. You don't really expand Poplin. It continues to operate the way it is. But you take the 12 Mile Creek, you take the Crooked Creek Basin and you create its own force main all the way down to 12 Mile and you pump it by itself over to 12 Mile. Again, you still have to expand the 12 Mile Creek plant because you're adding nearly 2 million gallons of capacity or more to the plant that's not there now. You're obviously having to create a new force main in order for you to pump that over to the plant by itself. And then you would also include the east side expansion as well as the CIP projects and make sure that they meet our costs for the environment that we have. And we estimate that to be 8.5 million for the next 3 years and then down to 8.5% increase for the next 3 years and then 2.5 beyond that. Yes, sir.
Question. I'm looking back at your previous slide that says the expansion from 7.5 to 9 will be complete in 2025. Is this particular one just going straight to 12 because you got saying it's
Yeah,
going to be done in
well, what you would,
2024?
this is straight to 12, yes, sir.
Not do the 7?
I don't think you would split it, or I don't believe you would split it. You would go straight to 12.
Okay.
Yes, sir. All right. So this is all of them kind of shown together, so you can see them all together. This is what we project. And I want you to understand that, you know, we don't really come up with these numbers per se. Stantec has our rate model, and they take all of these capital projects. They take the bonds test. They take the amount of system development fees. They take the amount of 365-day reserves we have, and all of that's plugged into, and there's a lot of other stuff, into the rate model. And then we put these capital projects in, and it comes up with what those anticipated rates are. So this isn't us coming up with this. We supply the cost of what we think the projects will be. They put it into the model and run it and say, well, based on all of that, based on our assumptions for revenue and for expenses, this is what the anticipated rate impacts are. That's where we get these numbers from. Annually and actually routinely, we continue to look at that information, but it's a snapshot. It's the best information we have at that time. So I wanted to revisit what the capacities are at the plant, so you keep that in mind. 12 Mile, you're running 5.8 million gallons through there. Actual flows right now, that's as of March, end of March. Obligated, you've got another 1.6 million gallons obligated, so you're at 99% if you added those two together. And if you took all the projects that are submitted, I don't mean all the projects that have engineering, I mean all the projects that are submitted. There are some projects that are submitted in a conceptual phase. That number includes those. So it's engineered plans as well as conceptual plans. Then you would be at 109% today if you were to say, what does it look like today? Same thing with Poplin, which obviously flows to 12 Mile. You've got a permitted capacity of 1.5. Current flows are 1.2. You're already at 80%. Obligated, you've got 320,000. That puts you over 101%. And projects that are in review, another 450,000, which puts you at 131,000. Remember, you have an EQ tank project that is moving forward. It will provide additional capacity if 12 Mile Creek or something is done for that, because right now I can't have more capacity in Poplin if I don't have capacity in 12 Mile. So those two go hand in hand. That project is moving forward with Poplin. Hopefully, if a decision's made, that will offset that to some degree. But those are the capacities for Poplin. And then with Crooked Creek, permitted capacity at 1.9, currently flowing about 60% of that at a little over 1 million. Obligated, almost 500,000, which puts it at 86%. And then your projects in review are a little over 600,000, which puts it at 119%. We are not currently at the board directed cap of 95% for Crooked Creek, so projects can move forward with capacity. There is, however, a CIP project, which is a new interceptor, that is limiting some projects from being able to move forward. Because that pipe is constrained, we can't say that there's capacity until that actual project is under construction. Once it's under construction, then yes, we can say there's capacity, if there is capacity at that time. It's going to take some time to put that interceptor in, but projects that are affected by that interceptor cannot move forward until something is done as far as that interceptor being in place or additional capacity is provided for the Crooked Creek plant. So I just want you to be aware of that. Just giving you some information about the capital projects. This are the things that are in play here over the next few years. What this doesn't show you is it doesn't show you the out years. So when you look at 22, 23, 24, you know, those are, they don't look like big numbers. I mean, I know 28 million is not a small number, but they don't look like huge numbers Because the reality is in 25, 26, 27, those are years where you actually bring in a number of those projects that you have to pay for. And they're not shown in this first 3 years. But you'll have, if you do expansion for Lower Crooked Creek, well, that's not shown here. Obviously, you'd have to show that in 25, 26, 27. Same thing, if you were building the expansion for East Side, that's not going to show up in the first 3 years because you're not spending money per se on that construction of that project over the first 3 years. But this is just to give you an idea of some of the capital things that are going on within the first 3 years of the project. All right, so yeah, as you heard Andy talk about, there's some ideas, some suggestions, things for you to think about. You know, do you want to create a new rate classification for multifamily? Do you want to create a new rate classification for agricultural and industrial? Those are decisions we'll need you to make at some point in the near future. And do you want to have those classifications reflect the cost of service? Our recommendation, obviously, at this point in time is we wait on that until after we've gotten some more data. But you can still establish a classification for those three if you want to in the future. That doesn't affect the other issue of trying to get a cost of service on that. So those are some rate decisions you might need to make in the near future. Miscellaneous fees. We showed you what we have in place as far as what we collect. It's been 1996 or so since those fees have been changed. You've seen the background on that. We went through this in great detail. I'm not going to go over it in any more detail on this, but ultimately what I will tell you, I want to go through is what we're going to suggest that you consider is that you adjust those miscellaneous fees, but we do it over a 2-year time frame. And if we have to decrease one, because there are some that it's actually suggested that go down, we decrease it within the first year. So you take those increases, and just give you an example. You've got, say, the disconnect processing fee at $50, and we're saying that it should be $140. Well, we would tell you that you would take that $140 and you would make it $70 the first year. And then you would make it $140 the second year. So essentially you would take all of those and you would go in a 2-year time frame until you got to the point where it meets this current cost of service analysis. Now that doesn't mean we're done. I think we need to do a new cost of service review every couple of years or so. We shouldn't wait from 1996 till now. Yes, sir.
Brian, what's the difference between someone moving out of a house and wanting their water service stopped and a disconnect?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Because I
Maybe
don't know
someone
of
else can
anybody that gets a disconnect unless you're demolishing the building.
A disconnect is when we disconnect for non-payment, and they haven't paid their bill.
Okay, so disconnect on this is for non-payment. So whenever someone doesn't pay us, we charge them a fee for that. Now, you know, obviously if they haven't paid us for the water, we're still going to have to go after them for the disconnect fee. But it is a way of saying, listen, you should have paid your bill to start with. This is some extra cost that you have to pay because we have to actually go out there and physically disconnect the meter and prevent them from using the water.
Right.
Yes?
There's a 2-page handout that they all have, if you want to mention.
Okay, yeah, Young pointed out that there should be a 2-page handout, which, yeah, that actually shows the 2-year, so that you can see what we would be recommending you consider. So year 1, those would be the fees. Year 2, that's what the fee would go to. I didn't show those on here, but I did want you to, that's our recommendation, that you consider raising these fees. I did hear Commissioner Rushing, and I think it is probably a good idea for the board to consider a policy for how we handle the short line program. I think we can certainly implement a way of trying to capture what those costs are at that time for new customers versus someone who comes in later and says, I'd like to tap to your system, but they were never tapped into the system before. I think that's a reasonable request. The board can certainly give us direction on that.
There's a lot of variables because putting a tap in just red clay is one cost, but if you have to do it through a concrete surface or, road,
Sure.
I mean, it's not a apples to apples necessary, just put a tap in.
It is not. And again, as I indicated, we try to go to as much of a fee structure or a fee statement, so people they have an idea of what we're going to charge them. The average customer wants to have some idea of what they're going to pay. Now, sometimes it will cost more for you to bore under the road and make a connection because the water line's on the other side. That's just the nature of the beast. This is a goal to have that so that it captures the cost. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's a little off, but overall, it will cover the cost for most connections.
In today's environment, going underneath the road is just part of what the fee is right now, right? There's no additional charge for going underneath the road to service the other side of the road.
I will not,
It's an average cost. It's an average.
so it's an average cost right now.
But
Yeah.
that'd be included, is what I'm saying. Okay.
So as we're saying, these are suggestions and recommendations we would make for you to consider for the miscellaneous fee recommendation. So we also recommended that the board consider removing your 95% cap if you make decisions to expand capacity. And the reason why we say that is, understand, we're not out of capacity in our plans. We are at a point where we don't have a plan to expand capacity. So the plants are under their rated capacity. And there is time for new connections to be made and for that system to grow and for people to have projects to move forward through the process. But if the board doesn't give us direction on how to expand capacity, then that was the reason why we asked you to set the 95% cap, because we don't want to get in a situation where we're over permitting a plant. Now, if you give us direction to expand the plant, then there is time in which those connections to be made, and we can manage that, and we believe that we can meet those needs over time. That's a board decision. But I want you to be aware, we have the ability to serve new projects. It is just, we didn't have the direction from the board on capacity. That was the issue.
With what's in the pipeline now? When we do the 1.5 million at 12 Mile, how long will it take to consume that capacity?
Well, understand, this is the thing about the pipeline. That number that you were shown previously included all those possible projects that may or may not come to fruition. That 750,000 gallons that we showed you for 12 Mile, just by itself, that has projects that are conceptual in nature.
I
Yeah.
want to advance to slide 26. That'll answer Commissioner Holmes's.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
So he's telling me what to do,
Oh, okay.
which is good. So where I was going, and this is great, if you were to only pull out the projects that have submitted construction and engineering drawings, pretty much if someone gives you engineering plans, they're moving to get that project completed. That's not inexpensive to pay to have engineering plans done. And so this will show you what we currently have as far as projects that have submitted construction engineering plans that are closer to being considered for capacity. So in in 12 Mile, without Poplin, you've got 15 projects in various stages of review, totaling about 314,000 gallons. In Poplin, you've got 3 projects, totaling 168,000. Those two together is roughly 480-some thousand total for 12 Mile Creek, because Poplin flows to 12 Mile. And then for Crooked Creek, you have 5 projects, and those 5 projects total almost 350,000 gallons. These are the projects that we would tell you are the ones that are imminent. When I say imminent, I mean they're moving forward with these projects. The other ones, they may or may not ever happen. We have a lot of folks submit a sketch plan and then they go away and they never come back. It really depends on the market, it depends on what they're doing for their project. But we showed you those because we needed you to be aware there is that information there. Those folks have made a request that they at least look at how much capacity is available.
Are those the ones that been through the planning board? Or may have- may
Some
not?
may have, understand, some may have. I would say most probably, and some are from towns where they don't come to us. They'll go to the towns and then they come through Public Works because the town handles their own planning and zoning. Some are through Union County. So it's a hodgepodge. And sometimes a developer will come in with a concept plan and they haven't gone through zoning and they'll submit it because they want to do it in anticipation of getting zoning approved. So there's no set, these are only projects that have been rezoned. Some are, some aren't. Okay. So, where are we at here? I got that one. One of the things that we're going to have the board do is we are going to have to bring back to the Board of Governors your decisions for rates and fees, because the Board of Governors actually makes the decisions on rates and fees. And obviously, the capital projects that you approve will have an effect on rates, not necessarily fees, but on rates. So we will, and we do anticipate that we'll be coming back in May for the board to make decisions, Board of Governors to make decisions on rates and fees. What this board is going to be asked to do is at least give us some direction on that so that we know how to calculate and structure all of those things for the Board of Governors to take in action. We've given you estimates for these times. We will bring you back the actual ordinance and the actual rates and fees for you to adopt at that point in time based on the direction that you give us. So keep in mind, there's future actions that you are going to have to take, the Board of Governors is going to have to take. I gave it on that. This is just service areas. So at this point in time, we're really at the point where we're going to ask the board to take some actions. And so my suggestion is that you start with Lower Crooked Creek because so much is driven by what you do or don't do with Lower Crooked Creek. And so my recommendation is that the board decide what you would like to do with Lower Crooked Creek. We go to 12 Mile Creek, make a decision what you would like to do with 12 Mile Creek. And from there, we just hit every point that we did until we get full direction from the board. I'll be happy to answer questions you might have.
Go ahead.
Mr. Simpson.
Question for you, Brian.
Yes, sir.
And I know you're thinking in the back of your mind, the last thing I need is another scenario, right, after all this work we've done, right?
Okay.
You and I had a brief discussion the other day, and this is just to help me understand and maybe to vet with the board since we're here in front of the public. We talked about that potential to maybe utilize 6 Mile to serve some of that west and some of that Weddington area intentionally to work in that direction. Just elaborate on that a little bit in terms of.
Sure. So in the board CIP that, and I'm sorry, your master plan that was adopted in 2016, there was an area studied, and I believe it's called the Mundy's Run Basin, and that's the area of, I'm going to try to show you right here. That's this area roughly about right here, okay? As you can see, there's a lot in here that's not served by sewer. Currently, all that wants to flow really this way, down here to 12 Mile Creek. 6 Mile Creek, it goes this way. And there was a study done, well, how could there be some way to provide sewer capacity in this area, and what would you do if you did that? And that study came back and said, well, the best way to do that is to create a regional pump, take offline a couple of smaller pump stations, and then pump all that flow back around, well, pump it to basically a gravity position where it would then go down to 12 Mile Creek, and you would treat it at 12 Mile Creek. And so that project was put in your master plan, but it was really driven by when does a development dictate that should go in. And it was anticipated that that cost would be borne mostly by the development community and less by the county. We have had some discussions with the town of Weddington. They're interested in seeing some potential sewer in that area. So under that scenario, the estimate that has come back from the developer's engineers, that's about a $6 million cost. And that's pretty hefty price tag. We understand that. The question was asked, well, can you flow that to 6 Mile Creek? And the answer is, you can, absolutely. As long as you're willing to pump it, you can. What I can't tell you is that cost any cheaper than $6 million? We don't know the answer to that. It may cost just as much money to create the pumping system and the force main to get it over to 6 Mile Creek to then get it into the McAlpine Creek sewer plant. It may cost just as much. We don't know the answer to that. But is it an option? Sure. As long as the cost, either A, the board is willing to bear that cost, or B, the developer's willing to bear that cost, there's always the ability to pump if the board were to authorize this. Now, I say that very clearly. We would ask the board for permission to pump this to 6 Mile because it's not intended to go to 6 Mile. It's not in that service area. And so you would have to tell us that you wanted that to be pumped to the 6 Mile Basin before we would ever even consider that an option. Because right now, that's not how it flows. And this is a service area, and we try to maintain that service area unless it makes good reason for you to go outside that service area. Does that answer your question?
Sure, thank you.
When we talked about 6 Mile, it was talking about a line going from 12 Mile over to 6 Mile, but it's insufficient to give us any relief.
So that's this line here, I believe. Am I correct on that, John?
That's the diversion pump station.
Yes. So this is what diverts the flow from 12 Mile ultimately until you get to the 6 Mile where it's treated at 6 Mile. That does have to be upsized. I think we are doing some work on rehabbing that and some other work in there. That's going to take about 4 months or so for us to do that work. I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, that is. Well, you know, what I've heard, and part of the question a while ago was, how long will it last? You know, if we do an upgrade, 1.5 million gallon.
Certainly.
So, you know, with that and looking at the pricing models that you gave us, I want to make a motion to authorize the purchase of necessary land and to commence the necessary studies permitting design up to, but not including construction of the facility for Lower Crooked Creek wastewater reclamation. We've got a situation here where we can be in this, if we don't choose wisely, in a couple of years, we're going to be in the same situation we're in right now. We have to think for the future, and 12 million gallons, we can be out of that. And, you know, a board in less than 10 years will be in the same situation and then have to wait for another 10 years to make it. So I'd like to proceed with the motion to purchase the land and do the study because, you know, that we have that money already, so that's not going to impact the tax rate or the.
Yeah, I think what Commissioner Helms is saying is the money that was anticipated for the cost of land purchase as well as studies was previously factored into your CIP. So there was some level of funding set aside originally for that.
Okay. So we have a motion. Any discussion? Commissioner Rushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to ask a few questions
Yes, sir.
on the scenario 3.
Yes, sir. Let's pull that back up.
On scenario 3, you've got fund the 12 Mile Creek expansion, 9 million gallons. Between the years of 2006 and today, basically 3 million gallons of sewer capacity has handled 15 years worth of growth. We were at 3 million gallons then, maybe a little under, and in those 15 years, we just now have used up that capacity. That 12 Mile Creek plant won't stop at 9 million gallons. It'll eventually go to 12 and is designed for 15 million gallons. So
Yes,
there's
sir.
a lot of capacity there.
Certainly.
The east side expansion that you've got in scenario 3 that shows
Mm-hmm.
a 3.5% increase every year. The east side expansion really depends a lot on Monroe and what they decide to do, right or wrong.
Yeah, so, and I don't know if I had explained it, so the idea here is, regardless of whether we do a project with Monroe or whether we do our own thing, there's a cost associated with that. And we've estimated that to be roughly $80 million.
So if we build our own separate plant, it's 80 million, and if we go in with them, it's gonna be 80 million.
It's our expectation that it's 80 million, and that's actually probably a low number, to be honest with you. We made an estimate.
So-
It could be
so-
higher than that.
So really, any decision on that needs to kind of come along with Monroe and what they decide to do. So at this point, I don't know that we can make a decision on funding that expansion.
Well,
So then we've got the 12 Mile, West Fork 12 Mile Creek's already funded. We may see some additional capacity pick up there if we have less inflow and infiltration. We've got 1 million gallons available already at 6 Mile that we're not using, already under contract, and a potential that we could ask for more. Whether we get it or not, we still have 1 million. So that, even with this 1.5 million gallon expansion, that's 2.5 million gallons potential in that area to serve. You've got the east side water, and this is something that we approved because, you know, it's important that we make sure that we're using that water there. But at the same time, we already have a line with connections on it that connects into our system along the existing $30 million pipeline that's being put in the ground today. So we have connections there that could also serve the east side of the county and can move that water into other areas. So we can push water with that line. That's about a $30 million, I believe, pipeline going to Marshville, right? Or going into the.
it is
Marshville.
roughly $32 million to have the long-term solution to pump the Yadkin water.
And that's already figured in. We've already figured that into our numbers.
That's in your 2.5%, and which is
Increase.
factored into that as well. Yes,
That's the
sir.
Wingate, right?
So
To Wingate,
if
yes.
we move that money to expanding 12 Mile Creek and use that where our immediate need is, and then decide at a later year what we're gonna do with, first of all, what is Monroe gonna do? What are we going to do with Monroe? And then the need for water there, because if we put the cart before the horse, if we put the water there and something happens and Monroe decides not to expand, or we find out that we can't expand, or anything happens there, you know, we just put the cart before the horse. So, you know, I would say scenario 3 is more what I like, because it has, with some minor changes. And I think that we can lower those rate increases, or possibly even not have rate increases if we manage the money a little bit better in what we're doing, and not try to do so much at one time. Whether we buy the land on Rocky River or not for the lower Crooked Creek, there's no purpose in buying it. There's no purpose in reserving it. There's no purpose in doing anything with it if there's no intention to build up there. And we just found out through legislation that as long as sewer's available, we may or may not have the ability to zone. Unionville and Fairview may not have the ability to have their zoning. Until we know more about that, again, I'm not interested in putting any more new sewer plants anywhere until we find out what's going on. So we've got a lot of stuff on the table, but it might be just too much. So I'll be voting against the motion because I think there are some better things that we can do, and I think there are some more decisions that need to be made by people other than this board. For example, the city of Monroe, what are they going to do? How are we going to work with them to move forward here before we start committing to rate increases that are 3.5% plus rate increases year after year after year? So and then even up to 5 and 6. And that's not even including, if we do the lower Crooked Creek plant, that's not even including all the pipelines that it's going to take to get there, which is going to raise the cost even more. And so you're going to be looking at
Sure.
6+ increases for many years. And we talked about that the other day, and you said, well, we got this pipeline included, but this pipeline's not included.
Certainly.
One does no good without the other. I mean, you're not going to help yourself.
So-
We've got capacity. We've got capacity that we can handle. We've got permits to get more capacity. So I don't see, again, in the same period, we have several million gallons, 2 or 3 million gallons available to us with what we already have permitted, and we kind of have the money for it if we use the money in a different place than we have it reserved for now. So,
Yes, sir.
Brian, Mr. Manager, just one clarification. So when you were talking about the Lower Crooked Creek plant project, Commissioner Rushing, it includes not just the cost of construction of the wastewater treatment plant, but the connecting pipelines from.
Only one.
Upland Basin.
Only one of them, though.
Only
He
one of the
doesn't
lines.
include both.
You have a line that's longer.
And I knew what he meant. He didn't
Yeah,
include
you have a
both.
line that's longer that's going to have to be built as well, and it's going to be more expensive.
So I understand, this is our goal. Our goal is to be very transparent with you, okay? In the past, I want you to understand, rates are one of those, it is an art. It's not always a science. And the reason it is because you can push here, but understand that creates a rate issue that you have to deal with in the future. Okay, so you don't want to fund $80 million for a Monroe solution. Well, at some point in time, you're going to find out what the price tag is, and you're going to have to fund it. And if you choose that you're going to fund it, and it's going to take you 3 years to fund it, well, those rate increases are going to be a lot higher because you waited so long to factor it into your rate increases. You're not going to be able to do it for 1%. You're going to have to charge a whole lot more. That's okay. That's a board philosophy.
Well, Brian, let me tell you it this way. Government is unique. The only other thing that I can think of comparable would be a power company. You have to have power to your home to live. I mean, just like you have to have water, and if you don't have a septic tank, you have to have sewer. So we're kind of unique in the way that we can charge basically whatever we deem fit, and there's no competition. There is no other entity going to come in and serve sewer and water to the people that have it, that Union County have as customers. Just like power, it's kind of, you can change your phone service, you can go to a cell phone, you can go do other things. But we're in a position where we're going full steam ahead with massive CIP projects, expensive CIP projects that I don't know that the people want. Everything that I hear, the 2050 committee, they came back, you're tired of roads, tired of overcrowding, tired of sitting in traffic, tired of, everything that we're going to basically say, okay, wait a minute, you're tired of it, but we're going to facilitate it. And not only are we going to facilitate it, the state legislature may approve that we can't even say anything about the zoning anymore. And so then it comes to a point where all these sewer and water decisions even become more important as to how quick we can overcrowd this county. So again, a slower, steady approach is fine, I think, with the people of the county. The people who vote for us, I think, are happy with a slow, steady approach rather than this, hey, let's get it while we can because we can get 3 hands in the air. That's not what people are looking for. That's not leadership on our part. I think that we have a lot of sewer capacity. I think we have a lot of sewer availability already in hand that we can use. The West Fork 12 Mile Creek, just completing that project, it's already funded, is going to help us with some of our issues. Is it going to be a new sewer plant? No, but it's going to help us with some of our issues. It'll help hopefully keep water from flowing in. So that's where I'm at on this, and I've been at it. I mean, I've been pretty clear in talking to you all about it. But as far as buying land in that area, I'm not for it because, we know now that, well, we don't know what the state legislature is going to do.
Sure.
And basically Fairview and Unionville zoning could be irrelevant, and our people up there are, just like they would be everywhere, they're not going to be happy about that. So I think we need to take a more cautious approach to where we locate sewer
We
and how
understand.
fast we expand.
We clearly understand. It's a board direction. Again, our goal is to just, tell you the impacts, because ultimately there are impacts based on your decision. We just want you to be aware of the impacts. One thing that I do want the board to keep in mind is that if you do nothing with Lower Crooked Creek and you do nothing with Crooked Creek, that sewer capacity will end because there is no other plan to expand the Crooked Creek service area. That's okay. That's a board strategy. I just want you to be aware that if no decision is made for Lower Crooked Creek and no decision is made to add capacity by pumping Lower Crooked Creek to 12 Mile, essentially 1.9 million gallons, you don't even have 1.9 million gallons. You have 80% of actual flows because the state will stop us at 80%. And your board cap of 95% will stay in place, whichever comes first, whether we hit 80% or whether we hit the 95%, which is permitted plus actual flows, that sewer basin will be at a standstill. That's okay. I just don't want anyone to misunderstand. That is where you will be.
And the equalization tank, what does that do?
We already have an equalization tank on that facility.
So the one that was just funded?
Yeah, it's not that one, that's Poplin. The Crooked Creek plant has had a equalization facility that's built and it's operational. You are maxed out on that site. So your options are stop, do nothing, just let it stay and it basically runs out. Provide some other capacity need for that, which either is Lower Crooked Creek or you pump it to 12 Mile. Those are your ways for you to provide additional capacity for Crooked Creek as it exists. So I just don't want anyone to misunderstand whatever actions you take, that is an outcome depending on the decisions you make. All right, so.
Commissioner
Yes,
Simpson.
I'm sorry.
Excuse me.
Just a couple of comments. In looking at that area that Lower Crooked Creek would serve, there's a significant, has been and continues to be a significant amount of present use value. Parcels in that area, significant amount. I certainly agree with you, Brian. I think we always realize that present dollars go a lot further than future dollars. So down the road, it's going to cost more money, and it's going to come eventually to serve that area. We've said many times, I've heard it said, we can't tie the hands of future boards. I'm not going to attempt to. So I'm not going to support the Lower Crooked Creek at this time.
Certainly.
Okay. I can tell you that, I respectfully disagree with some of Commissioner Rushing's arguments. I think it is our obligation to look to the future, and by not starting the process that allows, that could make 15-plus years. And I know that we just finished, in 2019, the last 1.5 million gallon upgrade to 12 Mile Creek, and now
Yes, sir.
we're technically out with what we've got planned so far. So we have a motion, and all in favor? Okay, all against?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly. So the next item we would ask you to give us some direction on is obviously 12 Mile. What is the board's pleasure on what we do for capacity for 12 Mile? And keep in mind that part of that is also what do we do for other projects that are sort of in the waiting as far as 12 Mile goes. So we'd ask the board to give us some direction on 12 Mile.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Well, we've had quite a bit of discussion over the past months. There's been a lot of publicity about rates and rate increases. To the point I'm pretty averse to talking about rate increases. With that being, in addition to that, we can't seem to gain momentum as a board on a consensus for managing future growth. I'm not sure how many sessions this is about scenarios and options, but it's a number of them. So time to fish or cut bait, right, Brian?
Yes, sir.
But I've always said that I like soft landings. There's nothing worse than running into the side of a mountain as you look to the future. And I understand the plans and needs that are in progress by people out there. And I sympathize with that. So I will move that we direct staff to accelerate the expansion of the wastewater treatment capacity 12 Mile to 9 million gallons by approximately 2022 at an estimated cost of $26.3 million, and authorize staff to begin that planning and design for the said expansion.
Any discussion? Commissioner Rushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to support the motion because, again, you know, we have the permits in place, we know we can do it, and it'll help us meet the commitments that we've already made. I would like some discussion, maybe later at the Board of Governors or whenever we do it, about utilizing the money that's been approved for the east side water, accelerating that to be used for that project to help offset some of the rate costs. Because until Monroe decides what they're going to do, and we come to some kind of working relationship with them, I don't know that putting water there before the sewer gets worked out is going to help us very much. And again, can we use those connections that we have already built in to the existing pipeline to transfer water into that area? And that's something curious I'd like to know, but I am going to support the motion.
Yes, sir.
I'm somewhat reticent to vote yes for this, mainly because adding more capacity to a system where we don't really treat this very expensive good as a scarce item. I think that's a real problem. Will Commissioner Simpson accept as a friendly amendment direction to staff to present to this board with all speed options for including allocation of capacity in interlocal agreements with the towns of Union County?
Let me ask you to say that again.
Yes, I'm asking for a friendly amendment to direct staff. So we're giving direction to staff as a board to present back to our Board of County Commissioners options for including in interlocal agreements the allocation of capacity for towns. So in other words, we're looking at a new model for using capacity for water and sewer, that towns will be allocated capacity, as opposed to the current situation where towns just have the expectation that capacity will be available.
Well, I would say that I have always believed, in fact, I believe I made the motion to pursue an interlocal agreement with the municipalities, and I believe we all need to be pulling in the same direction. I think that would certainly help lead to that. I take that friendly amendment, and I'll say yes to that.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. I can support your motion.
Well, can I ask that you also consider a time frame instead of dragging it out? Because the resolution, if we don't have a resolution by X amount of time in the very near future, we're in a situation that I think is more critical that we get this 12 Mile Creek started. I agree with it. I'm supportive of doing the 1.5 million gallons, but if we wait without a time frame that this has to be accomplished, then we can create ourselves a deeper hole.
I guess, are you referring to a time frame for the interlocal agreement?
If we don't have the
Or are you referring to a
interlocal-
time frame for the expansion?
If we don't have an interlocal agreement by a certain time, the expansion goes forth without.
Well, I guess I would have to lean toward the expertise of staff and legal from that standpoint, because it's a mutual decision. It's not a decision on the part of this board. Set a timeline as to when that interlocal agreement might be agreed to.
Right.
It's going to require the input from municipalities as well, so.
Sure. I understand, Commissioner, do you mind if I?
Of course.
So I understand the Commissioner Helms' concern. However, we don't know how long it will take for us to, number one, come up with an allocation strategy, and number two, get the towns to, buy into that. It may take several months. Understand that if the board moves forward with this, we are going to be in design, and that design will take us a period of time. So we do have a little bit of time before we pull the trigger on the construction side of it. I would say at this point in time, if we keep the motion the way it is, not worry about a timeline, and if we've not made sufficient progress, maybe in 6 months, then the board can come back and say, what's going on, what's the issues?
with that.
That's how I would recommend you consider it.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, and I certainly understand it may take some time to, even once we have a model that we like and an agreement that we like, it's gonna take some time to gain the agreement of towns.
Sure.
I'd just like to know, could staff perhaps in, 3 months, 4 months, could be able to come back to the board with, here are some options that you can look at in terms of allocating capacity that we think, might be accommodated in an interlocal agreement.
Sure. And we can routinely report back to the board our progress so far.
Brian, if I might, Commissioner Williams and board members, just so you are aware, Brian and I are actively engaged in the discussions with the town administration for 3 of the municipalities that have the more aggressive density needs. That's a very good word, needs. We have meetings, a meeting set up this Friday and another one for next week. So we're moving in that direction with those discussions regarding what their needs are, and getting some input from them regarding allocations of capacity. I'll be transparent. The one thing that when you're trying to negotiate something like that, not having anything to offer in terms of capacity kind of limits your ability to move that forward. So, but we are having those discussions, gaining those perspectives. I think that where we are at with regard to this whole interlocal agreement process, I think this is the next natural step in those discussions. So we've already got that set up, and I appreciate you providing that, or making the motion to provide that direction.
Commissioner Ray?
Brian, I just want to add some levity to it. I've observed you over the last 2 or 3 months, and you've had some balls knocked out of the park and hit a few. But I believe you're coming into form.
Okay.
And you're still on the mound, and I believe you'll be able to pull this off pretty quick with these towns.
I thought you said I hit some home runs. Instead, you were saying I threw some home run
Threw some
pitches.
home
Okay, I
runs.
misunderstood. It's
And
okay,
hit a
though.
few pitches, batters.
Okay.
But the manager left you on the mound, because we
Okay.
know once you settle down.
Okay. He's not doing this. He's not telling bring
Right.
in. Okay, all right.
Brian, this is not a curveball.
Yes, sir.
All right, we have a motion and an amendment to it and so I'll call a vote. All in favor? Aye. All against?
Okay. All right, so the next item we asked the board give us some direction on is the east side sewer area. Commissioner Rushing obviously has indicated that that's what you can consider, and you can always consider moving these things out. We just wanted you to understand the impact of a decision to expand capacity on the east side, whatever that decision is. So obviously, we want some direction from you. How do you want to move forward? Currently, what's in your summary of rate impacts is an estimate of $80 million to accommodate some sort of capacity expansion in the east side. It would be estimated at 8 to 10 years away before it becomes available for use, but there would be some cost up front that you would have to incur. Again, that is an estimate, and that was an attempt to spread that cost out over time. The board has some direction. We're looking for direction on what do you want to do on the east side.
So you're looking for rate models.
So we're looking for the board to, if you agree to include this in your rate model, then obviously that would be something we'd have to bring back to the Board of Governors, and it would be in one of these rate forms. If you say, we don't want to include $80 million in your rate model, then we're going to have to go back to the rate folks, pull that number out. We're going to have to say, what is that impact? But I still need direction from you. What do we want to do on the east side? Because we still need some direction. If the direction from the board is, let's just talk to Monroe, but we're not plugging any dollars into the cost, that's fine. As you understand, though, the cost isn't going away. There is a future cost, and at some point in time, your rates will reflect that, as long as you understand that.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I thought we already had scheduled a meeting with Monroe.
We have.
Certainly, we do. But understand, our ask for direction now is, do you want to include some level of funding in your upcoming rate decisions to accommodate a solution on the east side?
I think those discussions will be a lot more productive if we do. Don't you agree?
Then I'd like to make a motion to instruct staff to prepare a rate model for consideration by the Board of Governors that includes at least $80 million to increase wastewater treatment capacity for the east side via a partnership with the City of Monroe or construction of our own facility or through some other option to increase wastewater capacity consistent with the needs presented today. Yes, sir.
With that, I look back at the scenario where it had the lower Crooked Creek, where it wasn't adding any money, wasn't really a cost to it yet. We're just
With the
talking
land
about buying
purchase?
yeah.
Land purchase, yes, sir.
And then I look at this and say, until we know what we're gonna do, committing and raising the rates just to, if Monroe says we're not gonna expand, we're not gonna do anything, we're just gonna let it lay like it is, then we're gonna have to decide if we're gonna build a plant on our own, or let's say that, and here we have two partners in the east, in Marshville and Wingate, that we don't know what they're gonna do. I mean, we don't know right now, everything's up in the air there. So, what if Wingate partnered with Monroe to do 2 million gallons of capacity? And then we just had to fund our 2.5 million that we already have. So there's a lot of questions up in the air on this that, I'll vote along with the motion, because I think this is a common sense thing to work with Monroe. I know you and I have always agreed that we should work with Monroe, and I agree with it now. But there are some potentials there for, we talked about the towns having skin in the game and things like that.
Sure.
If Wingate decided to go in and get their own capacity, or Marshville decided to go in and get some capacity reserved, maybe they come to the table with some dollars too. But yes, I will vote for favorable.
My understanding is you're going to provide us with information that at future Board of Governor meetings, we can decide.
You'll actually
Give
have,
us enough information to make a decision.
you'll have to adopt ultimately a rate ordinance, which will have the rates that are reflective of the projects that you approve. And the Board of Governors will have to make that decision. This helps us to be able to put that into that structure so we can bring that to you. Now, ultimately, you still have to make a decision as Board of Governors.
Okay. Any further
Right.
discussion? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, if I might. So we do have a meeting, a joint meeting with the Monroe City Council scheduled for May the 20th. They have a number of needs, and they have some plans for what they are considering with regard to expanding sewer capacity. They also have some water needs. We've just completed a east side sewer study. We know we have some future needs.
Yes.
in that area that include Marshville Wingate, but a larger service area than that with regard to our industrial park or proposed industrial park and some other items along those lines. Part of this meeting on May the 20th, hopefully there will be agreement with the city of Monroe to form a joint working group consisting of elected officials, administrators, and utility directors that will hash out details of how we can work together. You know, we have resources that might benefit them, they have resources that might benefit us, but ultimately, how do we work together and do that? I would imagine that those discussions would take place fairly quickly in the very near term. Keep in mind that any rate increases do not go into effect until January the 1st. So you know, for planning purposes, setting aside funding in the $80 million, you know, and going ahead and starting that, demonstrating that we know we're going to have to make some level of investment on the east side, I think is a good signal to Monroe that we're a willing partner in that negotiation. But for this board, also keep in mind that whatever the result of those discussions are and whatever the work committee comes up with and makes recommendations back to the board, you have plenty of time between now and January 1st to make an additional adjustment based on those outcomes. So please keep that in mind.
Cool. Thank you.
Any further discussion? We have a motion on the floor. All in favor? Aye. All against? None.
And then last, what we have here is we do need, again, as I said, a little bit of direction from the board as far as rates as a whole. So you gave us some direction for East Side. So what we're looking at here is we're going to include the projects, which would be 12 Mile. There would be a factor in there for obviously the East Side and then the base. And we're looking for direction from the board to actually, again, go back and take that information and create the proposed rate ordinance that the Board of Governors will actually have to adopt at some point in time. As Mark pointed out, if you adopt it, it's not going to go in effect until January of 2022. So you would have some time to make changes if necessary. But we asked to bring this to you, to the Board of Governors. So again, we're looking for the board's direction to create those rates with all of the projects that you've mentioned so far.
Brian, I would support that motion if we can schedule some 2-on-1s once y'all complete it,
Okay.
but before it's brought to the
Before it
board.
goes to the board as a whole, certainly.
Okay, you want to requote the motion?
I'll make the motion to authorize y'all to get back to the Board of Governors with the modified new rate schedule.
Okay.
But with the caveat of us having a chance to look at it through the 2-on-1s before it's put on the agenda.
Certainly.
Any further discussion? Have a motion on the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, all opposed?
Now, I think that's the last thing. We've got direction from the board. We will bring to you, as Board of Governors, the fees for you to consider. I would ask, though, today, is the board comfortable with our recommendation of doing a 2-year gradual increase, 2-year increase for those miscellaneous fees? So I would ask, with the board comfortable with that, basically that scenario, and we would build that into a decision for the board to make as the Board of Governors at a future meeting in May.
Can I speak to that, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I'm comfortable with a 2-year period for the proposed miscellaneous rate increases. I am very reticent, at least in the next fiscal year, to look at another volume increase, so I think we need to look at ways of avoiding that. I think updating our miscellaneous fees, which I think had been indicated hadn't been increased since 1996.
Yes, sir.
Is a great start. I'd also like us perhaps to explore the current practice of including depreciation expense in our fund balance. You know, might there be some alternatives to that? Might we be able to scale that back? It seems like a depreciation expense which has no impact on cash flows. You know, could we at least explore that and see if there's a way to avoid a rate increase at least for January 1st of next year?
Again, I'm not looking for necessarily a motion. I think I'd see some, I don't see anyone saying no. So we will bring that back as a board decision for the Board of Governors on your miscellaneous fees. So that will be another action item the Board of Governors will need to take in the future. So
Okay.
that is all I have at this
Mr.
point in time. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Simpson.
One other item with regard to the action we've taken this evening, and also in light of the fact that we're coming out of a pandemic and we're not certain about where the economy necessarily is. And in order to keep everyone aware that this is a critical issue and we need to continue to move forward rapidly, I would move that we maintain that adopted 95% capacity limit at 12 mile.
Any discussion? Have a motion on the floor? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, sir.
We got the direction we needed. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Mr. Manager, do we have anything else you'd like to add?
We certainly appreciate the board's time this afternoon. This has been a lot of weighty topics. It's been a long time coming. We're glad to receive the direction, and thank you for what you've done today.
All right, with that, I'll have a motion to adjourn our special meeting. All in favor? Aye.
Slow down.
All opposed?